Hour number 3 of the Morning Rush. Going to the phone lines, welcoming in Stewart Mandel, editor-in-chief of The Athletic College Football. You can follow him on Twitter at SL Mandel. Stewart, appreciate you making some time for us this morning. I want to get to some Arkansas stuff coming up, but two of the most pivotal games of the college football season we saw this past weekend. Florida downs Georgia behind the arm of Kyle Trask, and then Ian Book and company's more Kyron Williams than anything. They take down Clemson. Just kind of your thoughts on the biggest two games from the weekend, Stewart.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't ask for a better game than Notre Dame Clemson, given the build-up. That game had been on the schedule since for a while. It was originally supposed to be a non-conference game, so it kind of sets up perfectly the way it played out. Obviously, with Notre Dame pulling the upset and with Clemson having so many injuries that when we think they'll play again in the ACC championship game. And it could be a playoff play-in game, or it could be a chance for possibly both teams to make it. Florida, Georgia, I think, really illustrated some issues. I mean, it was a great win for Florida, and I think it showed the issues Kirby Smart has right now where, for all the number one recruiting classes he's assembled there and all the five-star guys he signed, he still has a problem at quarterback, a big one. And in this day and age, in 2020, you're not going to win the division championship or the SEC championship playing the style of football that Kirby has played there. He's got to find a better quarterback to take the program to the next level.
Stewart, Georgia's having major issues at the quarterback position right now, and I look back over Kirby Smart's tenure where at one point you had Justin Fields, you had Jamie Newman. They're no longer there. How important is the quarterback position for Kirby's future and his potential at getting a national championship?
He's had some bad luck in that department. I mean, he knew this was coming, and he tried to address it. He went out and got not just one, but two very highly regarded grad transfers, but who would have guessed? Obviously, COVID hits, and Jamie Newman opts out before he even plays a game, and JT Daniels, clearly that injury at USC was more serious than people realized, or he's just taken longer to recover from it because he's never been a candidate for the job, really. He's still running with the third string there. So people will criticize him about letting Justin Fields go. That's always a great hindsight is 2021. But even for this year, I mean, his options are very limited. They recruit another one of these highly rated quarterbacks every year. There'll be another one coming in next year. So it's not for lack of options, at least going forward. It's can you actually find a guy, develop him, and obviously have the right system. Todd Monken came in as the OC this year. There were a lot of hopes that he would really modernize that offense and it would be much more explosive, and that just hasn't been the case.
Stewart, I'd love to hear your opinion on this season's college football playoff format, and maybe how it should look in your world, in your vision, through your lens, with some conferences playing 8, some conferences playing 11, some conferences playing 10, with the playing field literally not even. What should the college football format look like this year? How should a college football playoff look like through your prism?
In an ideal world, you would do a 1-year expanded playoff and let all the conference champions in, but it's just not realistic. You've got too many different parties that have to sign off on that. And also, I mean, right now, I think their bigger concern is, are they even going to be able to play the playoff the way it is? I don't think adding games is anybody's hope or anybody's goal right now. It's, can we get in the games that are on the schedule? Are we going to be able to play? I mean, we've had multiple games canceled in the SEC already this week, and it's often due not to a whole bunch of guys testing positive. It's to the contact tracing that comes out of it. I'm personally very nervous that the week of the semifinal, one of these teams is going to not be able to play in the playoff game, or maybe they play the semifinals and then the week in between they have an outbreak and they can't play in the national championship game. So trying to coordinate a playoff, an extra round of playoffs this year, an extra round of travel, I think is asking a lot.
What do you do with a team like Wisconsin? What should a minimum number of games be to be considered? How do you look at a team like that? Or even Ohio State, who's been very dominant and is thought of very highly nationally, what's the minimum number of games that they should have to play for the committee to fully consider them?
I think that the Big Ten, I don't think Wisconsin can come back, win all its games, and be seriously considered for the playoffs. It's just too few games. Ohio State If they do play all their games, play 9. That's not that different than obviously. I know the SEC champion will play 11. Knock on wood. But if there's, for instance, a second SEC team being considered, that team will play 10. So it's not that different to me. But once you start talking about only playing 7 games, the Pac-12 champion will play 7 games. The Pac-12 is going to have teams that only play 5 or 6 games. That's where it gets to the point where I don't think they can really be taken seriously.
Stewart, I want to go back to when Sam Pittman was hired, and I'm not here to belittle you because I asked the same question. I said Sam Pittman has no head coaching experience in Division I football, and now he's about to enter the toughest conference, much less the toughest division in college football. And you and I were kind of joking yesterday. Just from the outside perspective, what do you think is the most surprising part of Sam Pittman and this Arkansas football team?
Just how quickly he went. I mean, we knew it would be a rebuilding job. This wasn't your situation where the team had become mediocre. The team was as you know, as bad as a Power 5 team could get the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. So progress to me would have been just becoming competitive, not necessarily winning a bunch of games. But they are winning games, and they very easily could have won another one, obviously, against Auburn. So, and the defense has gone from, I think, the worst scoring defense of any Power 5 school last year to upper half of the SEC. So that's a dramatic overnight transformation, and it's a lot of credit to him and certainly to Barry Odom. And I think that's where, that tweet that keeps getting sent back at me by Arkansas fans was sent the day he was hired, I believe. And, if you could have told me that day he's going to get Barry Odom as his DC, maybe I would have thought otherwise. That was a great hire. Great staff in general that he put together.
So, Stewart, on that note, with his success, could have potentially won 4 games. We know what happened in Auburn, Alabama. I wonder from your perspective, of course, all these Arkansas fans are calling in every day, Coach of the Year, SEC Coach of the Year, National Coach of the Year. Is he seriously going to get consideration for either of those 2 awards, in your opinion, if they finish out strong down the stretch?
Well, SEC Coach of the Year, absolutely. And like you said, they got to finish up strong, but given how remarkable this 1-year turnaround is, I mean, that's always a pretty good indicator of a great coaching job. Those National Coach of the Year awards often, I think they generally go to the coach of a playoff team or national champion team. I remember Scott Frost won it 1 year. It would be hard for let's say they end up finishing 6-4. I would think it would be hard for that guy to win National Coach of the Year, but certainly SEC Coach of the Year.
Yeah. What were your thoughts, or what entered your mind when you heard the news Sam Pittman had tested positive, and then a second test confirming that he had COVID and was going to miss the Florida game this weekend?
Well, I hope he's okay. For the most part, knock on wood, the coaches and a lot of FBS head coaches have gotten it at this point. We haven't heard of anybody having it too serious, and I hope that's certainly the case for him. That's obviously my first thought. It's been a really rough week in the SEC in regards to COVID. It just seems like this is the week that it hit the whole conference. And, knock on wood, it's pretty hopefully stays pretty limited for Arkansas and doesn't turn into the situation we're seeing at LSU, A&M, and some of these other places.
Yeah. At what point, I mean, obviously this has been a bad – what can you attribute this kind of week to? I mean, is it just what we've seen nationally with kind of this third wave, or kind of what can you attribute to where the SEC is at this week?
Well, I think, like you said, I mean, the whole country, it's I think, up 64%, the number of daily cases around the country over the last 2 weeks. So, I mean, it's not just an SEC problem, it's a whole country problem. Pac-12's had some cancellations as well. We've certainly heard rumblings that and we know how big Halloween is on college campuses, and I think a lot of I'm not going to go ahead and say that's the only reason, but I would not be surprised if some Halloween gatherings contributed certainly to the college specific one.
And then that's certainly a logical approach. Could you take another scientific or logical approach and say maybe there's some light at the end of the tunnel and it's not a train, knowing that these teams have had a number of cases, now they've had a larger number of cases, and that we know that the CDC and the guidelines say that you kind of got a 90-day window once you have tested positive. These teams have been through a pretty good number of teams around the team members, coaching staff members that now have went through it. How many more can test positive with a lot of these teams? At some point, you've ran through the ranks on your team. I mean, at some point, there's no one left who tests positive in the 90-day window. So I would think you're kind of over the hump to some degree with a lot of these teams.
That's right. So the rule is, once they've tested positive, they don't have to retest for 90 days.
Right.
Which means that the guys that are testing positive now are basically in the clear for the rest of the season. But if you ask coaches around the country, for the most part, there have only been a couple teams that had 30-something players test positive, or Wisconsin recently at 22, 23 players. It's the contact tracing that causes these cancel it to get these teams to get to the point where they don't have the minimum number that they need by the SEC rule to play in the game. So it's not necessarily that you're out of the woods yet, because it could be 4 cases, but if they determine that one guy had 10 close contacts after quarantine, that's the biggest issue, and it's causing a lot of frustration. Because it's very inconsistent from one place to the next. Cal had to cancel a game, might have to cancel a second one, and they had 1 positive case. But the contact tracing that the city there did knocked out a whole position group. And then other places you'll hear that they barely did any contact tracing. It's very, very subjective, and it's frankly something that who would have ever guessed, college athletics would have to deal with. This is an unprecedented situation.
Stewart Mandel with us. He's the editor-in-chief over at the Athletic College Football section. Stewart, when you think about what's going on with the SEC,
Greg Sankey went on Paul Feinbaum yesterday and said that he's meeting with the athletic directors about possibly playing makeup games on the same day as the SEC championship. Is that going to feel weird?
Everything about this year is weird. I would do it, and in fact, they're not going to be alone. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 are both doing that as a part of how they're getting in since they started late. They're going to be playing cross-divisional games. Now, those are games that aren't previously scheduled, so it's a little easier. You have to really, when you start looking at the LSU-Alabama game, you really have to move a lot of pieces around to make that happen because they don't have that common open date. And then, obviously, we know it's going to take a miracle for it to not be a Florida-Alabama SEC title game, but it's not official. So it would be kind of insulting to tell LSU you're going to play, you're going to play a rescheduled game on December 19th. Well, thankfully they're not out of it yet. So I wouldn't be surprised if once we get some clarity on that, once it becomes official, that some games get moved, because these are, first you want to give the teams the opportunity to play every game possible, but these are just valuable games. Alabama LSU is one of the most valuable TV games of the whole season for college football. So they want to be able to play that game, obviously. But to do it, you're going to have to then take 2 or 3 other games involving teams that aren't even, that aren't LSU and Alabama, and move them to other dates.
Stewart, before we let you go, I know you're not traveling with COVID and everything going on, but of your travels, I know you've worked with Fox Sports, now with The Athletic. You've made your way to a bunch of different stadiums, a bunch of college towns. Do you have a particular restaurant, a particular food item that stands out amongst the rest that as soon as this COVID stuff's over, you're absolutely going back for a game for?
I feel fortunate that the last trip for a football game before all this was to the national title game in New Orleans. So that's my absolute Baton Rouge, New Orleans, that part of the country, that cuisine is absolutely my favorite. So it wasn't that long ago that I had it. I would still rush back out there tomorrow if I could.
It's a great spot, man. A lot of, whether it's the beignets at Cafe Du Monde, and pick a po' boy place. You're going to find delicious food wherever you go. Stewart Mandel, editor-in-chief of the Athletic College Football. He's also the co-host of the Audible podcast. Stewart, we appreciate your time this morning, and hopefully we'll have some good games left this weekend based on how everything's going this week.
All right. Thanks for having me.